Hi everyone. It's now about the time of the semester you'll be getting your first assignments back. So this is a quick video on what to do when you get your assignments back. It can be a surprise sometimes to us when we look at the analytics that some students don't look at their feedback at all and don't follow up on their assignments. So here's some guidelines as to what to do and what to think about. A common experience for students is that they are disappointed with the grades they get, particularly those who haven't studied at a university level before. And that's a fairly natural response to the fact that you've moved from being one of the higher achievers, particularly in law. You've come from being a higher achiever in your earlier environment, particularly in school, to being in an environment where you're competing with people at that higher level. So you might be someone who's always gotten top grades and find that suddenly when you're in law school, you find that you are getting grades lower than you expected. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because the competition is that much higher than before. So you have to, I guess, realise that marks will be spread across a continuum in a subject. We don't mark according to a bell curve like we used to, which meant that we had to give a certain number of passes, a certain number of this, a certain number of that, and there was kind of a curve where most people were in the pass area, and smaller numbers in the higher grades. And then, of course, with the bell curve, you also had to fail a certain number of people as well, which was always a bit strange. So we don't do that, but there is a natural kind of progression that most people will be somewhere around the middle, and there will only be a smaller number of people who will achieve towards the higher ends of the scale. And that's merely a matter of, some of that's a matter of ability, some of it's a matter of the amount of time and commitment people make. One thing we don't do is start with 100% and take marks off. What we do is we work to criteria, and those criteria are benchmarks. So you start with 0 and you earn grades as you achieve each of those benchmarks. And generally speaking, for each of the benchmarks in a rubric, you'll have to hit the mark for each of those to get to a particular grade level. So you can't turn around and say, look, I did a credit level in everything, but my presentation was shocking and it was awful, and that was at pass level or fail level, and therefore I should somehow be able to trade that off in some areas against the other. When you use benchmark criteria, you have to achieve in all of them, and if you fail in one of them, you fail overall, and you need to achieve consistently. So that's the way criteria marking is done. And there's sometimes we have that when people say, what did I lose marks for? Well, you don't lose marks. You don't start with 100%. You start with 0 and you earn marks. So where you look closely at the rubrics and have a look at how you achieved against those various levels. Another response we sometimes have from students is, I did so much work. I worked so hard on this. I should have done better. And it's important that you reality check as well, because our guidelines say that you should be spending around 8 to 12 hours a week on each subject. That's including, attending the workshops, doing all the reading, and there's a lot of reading in law, and there's only going to get more. Working on workshops and working on assessment. Now, if you could put your hand on heart and say that you are working for each subject that you're enrolled in 8 hours a week, and you're not progressing as fast as as well as you should be, then you need to talk to one of us and get some advice as to how to enhance your performance. But generally speaking, people aren't achieving anywhere near that. So I often get that feedback from students, and they say, I'm so stressed, I'm working so hard. But when you sit down and actually map the hours out, it falls a lot shorter than the commitment that's expected. And we know that everyone has different commitments and different levels of engagement, okay? And people do work out that they can get through a course of study with less than the 8 hours per subject per week, and can sort of squeeze through. But you then can't be a hypocrite and say, I'm working so hard, this is unfair, if you're not actually doing those hours. And I won't go through the maths of it here, but when you map out your time for study and your time for working on assignments, as a rough guideline, it's probably around 5 hours per 10% of a mark. So if something's worth 20%, that's probably around 20 hours of work. that goes into that assignment if you are saying you are working very, very hard. So again, reality check, think about it. And remember that those hours that you're spending studying are hours you're spending actually studying. They're not hours that you're spending flipping over to Facebook or flipping over to your phone to see whatever messages or checking email. All those things are distractions. So it's important that you use feedback, that you overcome any personal feelings of disappointment that you might have. And you might not be disappointed, you might be really happy with it. That's good too. But it's also that you go back and you check the feedback and you use it looking forward. You don't just put the assignment aside and say that's it, it's over and done with. One of the things that's a constant source of a constant issue for students in terms of feedback is we want more feedback. Now part of that is getting value out of the feedback, because when we're marking, and we might be marking 100 students, we only have a limited amount of time to get that marking done. And we only have a limited amount of time to spend on that feedback. But that doesn't mean that's the end of it, because you can then take that feedback, think about it, and continue that conversation. And you might be surprised how few students actually stay in conversation around those things. So have a look at the feedback we give to you individually. We'll also give you feedback across the entire group for the common themes and issues. And then I guess some advice is, first of all, sleep on it. If you're really upset about it and you're really disappointed, sleep on it. Don't worry about it and have a look at it later. But don't forget about it. You can always give it to someone else to read. You might find that you're being overly sensitive about some things and some criticism, and none of us like taking criticism, but sometimes you might give it to someone else and say, I really feel like the person's being really unfair, and they might look at it and go, well, they're not really, it's a fair go. Check the rubric, check the instructions. Again, you might be surprised how often people don't read the instructions. And that's something which can be quite fatal in this circumstance, and certainly in the legal profession and in the world of law, you don't get second chances. We give you a lot of second chances at uni, and we give you a lot of support, but you're going to move into a professional world where if you screw something up, you have to live with the consequences of that. So make sure before you submit, you've read the instructions, but then when you go back to look at your feedback, you check what they were, and you make sure you didn't get the wrong end of the stick about some of this. Talk to your course coordinator. Very few people actually say, look, can I have half hour of your time to talk about what I'm doing and how I'm doing it? You'd be really surprised. And a lot of people say, oh, well, I don't want to bother you. Please bother us. We'll let you know if it's becoming a bother. We would generally prefer to do that than to have people disconnect or disengage. And if you are really aggrieved, talk to your CC about the review of grades procedure. Have a look at it. It's online. It should be connected to your student portal. But have a look at the review of grades procedure. It does require you to talk to your CC first. And sometimes people get very aggravated and very angry about things, and then they just go straight into appeal mode. And that doesn't really help you, because maintaining that relationship in the learning community, particularly with your teaching staff and your mentors, is extremely important. And sometimes it's more important to swallow your pride and actually ask for help than it is to start complaining and complaining to everyone else except for the one person who can help you with that. And the other thing to think about out of this process is the idea of resilience. And that's one of those core capabilities that employers are telling us they want more and more. They fear that a lot of modern graduates aren't very resilient, can't take criticism, and have difficulty learning from their mistakes. So this is an environment where you can practice some resilience, you can practice that process. There was some interesting research recently that suggested that a lot of younger people, and hey, all you guys aren't younger people, a lot of you guys are mature age, but this applies to all of us. But they're saying a lot of people today don't really believe that people can improve in skills, that they think people are either good at something or they're bad at it, and that practice and improvement just doesn't work. So there's some empirical evidence done with high school graduates that said that. And that seems quite surprising, because everything that's worthwhile requires constant improvement and constant practice and going back and looking at your mistakes and learning from them and integrating it that goes on. And I mean, this has been described as, I think, the Harry Potter generation. You know, how Harry Potter just sort of cruises into Hogwarts and has, you know, is great at everything and is great at Quidditch and never really has to try that much. It seems that there's a sort of a sense of culture that things don't come out of practice. Now, everything worthwhile, learning a language, learning a sport, learning anything requires that kind of resilience and that kind of use of feedback to go back, look very critically at what you've done, and to learn from it. So anyway, that's a long. I said it was going to be a short video. Didn't end up being a short video, but that's, I hope, hopefully some guidance as to where you go going forward, and encouragement that when you get your grades back, not just to put it aside and say that's it, it's over with, to actually think critically about what you've learned and where you're going to use this going forward.